Have you ever heard of a warrior whose senses were so sharp he could feel an enemy long before they appeared? A presence in the forest so silent, so aware, it felt less like a man and more like a ghost. Someone who could smell fear, hear heartbeats through solid cover, and track movement from impossible distances. Because during one of the bloodiest chapters in American history, there was an indigenous soldier whose abilities terrified both his enemies and the men fighting beside him, and his story was buried for decades. A single soldier, an indigenous man from the Yakima Nation, was reporting enemy movements before they happened, not minutes ahead, not hours, days, sometimes weeks. At first, commanders thought he was guessing. Then his guesses started saving entire units from ambushes that hadn't even been planned yet. By the end of World War II, this man, Samuel Two Rivers, was no longer being sent into battle. He was being studied. What happened next was buried under decades of classified files, erased reports, and official denials. But fragments survived. Testimonies, leaked documents, and a trail of impossible events stretching from secret military bases to national parks to nuclear command centers. Some say Samuel could see across time. Others believe he became something far more dangerous to those in power, someone who knew how the future breaks. Here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. The last known records don't suggest Samuel disappeared. They suggest he chose to walk away after warning that more people like him would be born, children who could see what's coming. Before we go any further, I need you to pause for a second and answer this honestly in the comments. Do you believe the future is fixed, or can it be changed? Type fixed or changeable below, and I want to know why. Because by the end of this story, you might realize the answer isn't as simple as you think. And can I get to know where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if you want us to keep uncovering stories like this, stories that were classified, suppressed, and almost erased, make sure you subscribe. These are truths the government never wanted fully exposed. Okay, so winter 1944, deep in the mist-choked forests of the Pacific Northwest, as World War II consumed Europe and the Pacific, a classified military experiment quietly began. Its code name was Operation Ghost Vision. The U.S. military was desperate. Conventional tactics weren't enough anymore. They needed an edge, something unconventional, something the enemy wouldn't see coming. That search led them to the ancestral lands of the Yakima Nation. For generations, whispers had circulated among the tribes, stories of people born with heightened perception, individuals who could sense the land in ways others never could. And at the center of those rumors was a young man named Samuel Two Rivers. Samuel was born on the Yakima Reservation in Washington State in 1923. From the moment he could walk, elders noticed something wasn't ordinary about him. While other children laughed and played, Samuel would suddenly stop, his head tilting toward sounds no one else could hear. By the age of 10, he could identify approaching visitors long before they came into view. More unsettling was his ability to describe how those visitors felt: fear, anger, exhaustion, with disturbing accuracy. The elders said Samuel had been born with the spirit of the eagle and the wolf together. Years later, in a letter discovered in 1976, Samuel himself wrote, "I was given the eyes of the eagle to see beyond the mountains, and the feeling of the wolf to sense what hides in darkness. I never asked for it. Sometimes it felt more like a curse than a gift." In 2009, declassified military records revealed why the U.S. government had taken an interest in him. An anthropologist working for the War Department, Dr. Elenena Whitman, had been tasked with a strange assignment: identify indigenous individuals with enhanced perceptual abilities that could be weaponized for war. After interviewing elders across the country, her search kept pointing back to the Yakima Nation. and eventually to a 21-year-old Samuel Two Rivers. He was brought to Fort Lewis under extreme secrecy. What happened there shocked even seasoned military officials. According to heavily redacted documents, Samuel could detect movement through dense forest from over 800 yards away. He could accurately identify the number of people hidden in a group with near-perfect precision. He could distinguish between American and foreign-manufactured ammunition by smell alone. He could even predict enemy patrol routes by reading disturbances in the environment that trained scouts completely missed. Lieutenant Colonel James Hargrove, who oversaw the assessments, wrote in a classified report, "Subject Two Rivers exhibits perceptual abilities that defy conventional explanation. While science cannot yet account for these capabilities, their tactical value cannot be overstated." His recommendation was immediate deployment. Despite objections from scientists who wanted to keep studying Samuel in controlled environments, he was transferred to the newly formed 1st Special Service Force, an elite joint American-Canadian commando unit. After sniper training, where he shattered every existing marksmanship record, Samuel was sent to the Philippines in 1945. It was there, in the suffocating jungles of Luzon, that the legend truly began. His commanding officer, Captain Richard Dawson, kept a private journal that remained hidden until after his death in 1988. What it contained reads less like a war diary and more like a supernatural account. February 3, 1945, Dawson wrote, "Two Rivers did it again today. We believed we were pinned down by a single enemy sniper. Under heavy fire, Samuel sat perfectly still. He closed his eyes. For nearly 5 minutes he didn't move. Then he spoke. There are 7 of them, not 1. 3 on the northern ridge, 2 in a banyan tree 300 yards east, 2 more moving south to flank us." He described their weapons, their ages, even mentioned that one was limping from a leg wound. When the area was finally cleared, every detail was exactly as Samuel had said. "The men are calling him the Phantom now," Dawson wrote. "Some of them are afraid of him. I'm starting to understand why." What made Samuel truly dangerous wasn't just his heightened senses, it was how he fused them with indigenous tracking knowledge passed down through generations. He didn't just observe the land, he listened to it. In March 1945, his unit was assigned an impossible mission: locate a hidden Japanese command post deep in a mountain jungle maze. Multiple recon teams had already failed. Samuel went alone. For 3 days he moved through enemy-controlled territory like a shadow. On the 4th day, he returned, not just with the command post's location, but with detailed intelligence about defenses, patrol rotations, and even the daily habits of its commanding officer. The strike that followed was devastatingly precise. American casualties were minimal. Military analysts initially refused to believe the intelligence came from one man. They suspected an insider, a spy. They couldn't accept that it came from Samuel's senses alone. As his reputation grew, so did the military's obsession with understanding him. Blood samples were taken, psychological evaluations followed. Experiments involving electromagnetic fields, radiation, and experimental drugs were conducted, often without proper consent. Dr. Whitman began to push back. In an internal memo dated April 12, 1945, she warned, "These abilities appeared deeply connected to the cultural and spiritual practices of his people. Our attempts to isolate and replicate them through Western science are failing and may be causing harm. Some things are beyond our current understanding." Her concerns were ignored. By May 1945, Samuel Two Rivers had been credited with over 70 confirmed enemy eliminations, many from distances experts considered impossible. But his true value wasn't his kill count, it was the lives he saved. Military historians now believe Samuel's intelligence prevented countless ambushes and spared thousands of American soldiers. Meanwhile, among Japanese forces, fear spread. Stories circulated of an American demon who could see through walls. Units refused to move at night, believing darkness made the mountain spirit stronger. Captured documents warned of a specific American operative, one who must be killed on sight using overwhelming firepower, because conventional methods, they wrote, would fail. As the war dragged on, the men closest to Samuel began to notice something was wrong. The phantom was changing. He grew quieter, more distant. He complained of crushing headaches that left him unable to function for hours at a time. Some nights he would wake screaming, drenched in sweat, describing events unfolding thousands of miles away, events that would later be confirmed with chilling accuracy. In a rare recorded interview from 1967, former squad member Private First Class Thomas Jenkins recalled, "Two Rivers said he couldn't shut it off anymore, the sensing, the knowing. He said it was like having 1,000 radio stations playing in his head all at once." Samuel would know when a letter from home was coming before the mail ever arrived. He predicted enemy attacks hours in advance, but the cost was brutal. There were times, he said, when he'd just stare into nothing, tears running down his face. He kept whispering about all the death he could feel around us. The most disturbing incident happened in June 1945. In the middle of the night, Samuel suddenly woke and gathered his unit's leadership. Calm but urgent, he described a massive Japanese counteroffensive scheduled for the following week. He sketched detailed maps of enemy positions he had never physically seen. He predicted the precise timing of the attacks and even named several Japanese officers involved in the planning. Days later, military intelligence confirmed his information through independent sources. Within hours, Samuel was removed from his unit and transferred to a secure facility under the direct control of a newly formed Strategic Services Division, the organization that would eventually become the CIA. What happened during the 3 months Samuel spent there remains almost entirely redacted. What is known is that when he returned in September 1945, after the war had officially ended, he was no longer the same man. Captain Dawson's journal entry from September 20th is brief but haunting. "Two Rivers returned today. His eyes are different, like he's looking at something none of us can see." When Dawson asked where he'd been, Samuel answered with a single word: "The future." Then he added quietly, "And it's worse than you can imagine." For the next 2 years, Samuel participated in classified operations across the Pacific Rim. The missions themselves remain unknown, but declassified flight logs show he was transported to locations in China, Korea, and even the Soviet Far East. Whatever he was doing, it mattered. He became one of the very few indigenous soldiers to receive the Distinguished Service Cross, though the citation is unusually vague, offering no details about the actions that earned it. The last official military record of Samuel Two Rivers is dated March 17, 1947. A medical discharge form lists the reason as psychological fatigue and sensory integration disorders of unknown etiology. Samuel returned to the Yakima Reservation, and then, slowly, he disappeared from public life. Local newspaper archives from the Yakima Herald Republic mention him only occasionally. He refused all interviews. Instead, he lived alone in a remote mountain cabin far from the main settlement. Tribal members left food and supplies at a designated drop point. Samuel claimed that being near other people caused him physical pain. He could no longer block out their thoughts or emotions. In 1954, a group of researchers from a program later linked to CIA front organizations attempted to make contact. Their interest was clear. The Cold War was escalating, and Samuel represented something intelligence agencies couldn't afford to ignore. According to local accounts, the researchers entered the mountains. They never came back. A search party eventually found their vehicle and equipment, but no sign of the three-man team. When tribal police checked Samuel's cabin, it was empty. No signs of violence, no struggle. For the next 3 years, Samuel Two Rivers was officially listed as missing. Then, in October 1957, a park ranger in Olympic National Park reported encountering a man matching Samuel's description, confused, disoriented, wandering near the area of his last known location. When approached, the man bolted. The ranger described his speed and agility as inhuman. Within minutes, he vanished into terrain so dense the ranger lost him completely. That sighting triggered something strange. Over the next 2 decades, hikers, hunters, and Forest Service workers across the Pacific Northwest reported encounters with a Native American man who seemed to appear and disappear at will. Many said they felt as if they were being studied, read, before he vanished back into the wilderness. Some claimed he warned them of imminent danger, flash floods, landslides, aggressive wildlife. In every documented account, those warnings came true. The most credible account came from Dr. Robert Stilwell, a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey working near Mount Rainier in 1962. In his field journal, Stilwell wrote, "I was collecting samples when I felt someone watching me. I turned and saw a Native American man standing about 30 feet away. I hadn't heard him approach, which was strange given the rocky terrain. The man looked at him and said, 'You need to leave this area by nightfall.' When Stilwell asked why, the man replied, 'Because it remembers what happened before, and it's going to happen again.' Then he turned and walked into the forest. Stilwell lost sight of him almost instantly, despite no visible cover nearby. Stilwell relocated his camp that evening. That night, a massive landslide destroyed the area where he had been working. When Stilwell reported the encounter, he was quietly debriefed by individuals identifying themselves as Department of Defense researchers. He was instructed not to include the incident in any official reports. By the mid-1960s, the legend of a watchful mountain spirit was firmly embedded in regional folklore. But within certain military and intelligence circles, Samuel Two Rivers represented something far more unsettling. Proof that human perception could be pushed far beyond known limits. Declassified documents later revealed that between 1966 and 1973, DARPA funneled over $15 million into a classified program codenamed Project Sentinel. Its goal: find and develop individuals with abilities similar to Samuel's. Test subjects included indigenous people from tribes across North America, especially those with cultural traditions centered on heightened awareness or far-seeing. None came close. The program's final report concluded that Samuel Two Rivers was either a statistical anomaly or possessed abilities derived from sources not replicable through existing scientific methods. The last confirmed sighting of Samuel came in 1976 during a massive forest fire near the Olympic Peninsula. Fire crews reported encountering an elderly Native American man who guided them through smoke-filled valleys with impossible accuracy. When asked how he could see in the thick smoke, the man replied, "I don't see with my eyes anymore. That's not how it works." After leading the crews to safety, he vanished. One firefighter later identified him from old military photographs as Samuel Two Rivers. He would have been 53 years old at the time, but the firefighter said he looked much older, as if the weight of 100 years rested on him. No death certificate was ever issued. To this day, Samuel Two Rivers' military status remains listed as inactive, special classification, a designation reserved for operatives whose work is still considered too sensitive to fully disclose. And the most disturbing details of his story wouldn't surface until 2001, when a Freedom of Information Act request finally forced the partial declassification of documents tied to Project Sentinel. When long-sealed documents were finally released, they revealed something even more unsettling. Samuel's abilities hadn't stopped evolving. According to these papers, what began as heightened perception gradually crossed into something far stranger. Dr. Whitman's personal journals, made public after her death in 1995, suggested that Samuel had developed precognitive abilities, the capacity to perceive events before they occurred. At first, it appeared tactical. He would know which ridge an enemy patrol would cross, or which building would become a sniper's nest, before the enemy themselves had finalized those decisions. But even Dr. Whitman began to realize this wasn't simply advanced awareness. "I no longer believe we are dealing with enhanced perception in any conventional sense," she wrote in August 1945. "Subject 2 Rivers appears to exist partially outside our normal temporal framework." When pressed about how he knew what enemy forces would do, Samuel grew frustrated. He insisted he wasn't predicting anything. "I see it already happening," he told her. "Not what might happen, not what could happen, what is happening, just not yet for you." The military's response was not restraint, it was escalation. Records show Samuel was subjected to increasing doses of experimental compounds derived from indigenous plant medicines, combined with early electronic brain stimulation techniques. Internal memos state the goal was to stabilize and amplify his precognitive abilities while keeping him operational. Decades later, former Army psychiatrist Dr. Victor Stein, who worked on classified research programs in the 1960s, offered limited testimony before his death in 2017. Samuel 2 Rivers was the most successful subject in a decade-long effort to develop enhanced human intelligence assets, Dr. Stein admitted. Then he paused. The abilities he demonstrated violated everything we understood about human perception, but the toll it took. Stein described Samuel as the most psychologically traumatized individual he had ever encountered. Imagine perceiving death and suffering not just in the present, but across time, past, present, and future, all at once, all equally real. The most chilling evidence comes from a partially redacted debriefing transcript dated August 4, 1945, shortly after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. "Can you describe what you're sensing right now?" "Everywhere." "What do you mean by everywhere?" "Not just now. It's spreading." "What's spreading?" "The burning, the sickness in the blood." He continued, his voice reportedly shaking. "I can feel them dying now, and 20 years from now, at the same time. Children who aren't even born yet screaming as their cells tear apart. It doesn't stop. It's still happening. It will always be happening." When the interviewer suggested he was referring to the weapons deployed in Japan, Samuel responded sharply, "You don't understand. You've torn something in the world. In time. I can feel it spreading like cracks in ice. The weapons you've made, the ones you haven't built yet, I can feel all the deaths they cause, are causing, will cause. Millions of voices crying out across decades." The interviewer attempted to steer the conversation back to military utility, asking whether Samuel could identify future deployment locations. At that point, Samuel became completely non-responsive. When he eventually spoke again, his statements were deemed so sensitive that every word was fully redacted from all B-classified versions of the transcript. 3 days later, Samuel Two Rivers was transferred to a highly restricted underground facility beneath Mount Weather in Virginia, later confirmed to be tied to the government's most classified research programs. He remained there for 13 months. Fragmentary records and testimony from personnel assigned to the facility describe a man who was no longer anchored to normal reality. Samuel would answer questions before they were asked, react to events before they occurred, speak in what one physician described as chronological salad, sentences blending past, present, and future into something nearly impossible to understand. Major Thomas Blackwood, head of security at Mount Weather, later testified to a closed congressional committee that researchers became convinced Samuel was no longer experiencing time linearly. He described future events with the same clarity as past ones, Blackwood said. You could tell you what you had for breakfast 3 days ago with the same certainty as what you'll have 3 days from now. And he was always right. That terrified the research team. Several requested transfers after Samuel began calmly describing, in exact detail, the circumstances of their deaths decades in the future. By 1947, military leadership grew deeply concerned, not just ethically, but strategically. Samuel's psychological state was collapsing. Reports described periods of catatonia followed by violent agitation, during which he shouted warnings about future wars and technological catastrophes. Dr. Whitman fought to end it. In a memo dated January 1947, she wrote, "Subject Two Rivers' continued participation constitutes a grave ethical violation and an increasing security risk. His mental state has destabilized to the point where he can no longer distinguish classified briefings from information perceived through his apparent precognitive abilities." She added something even more disturbing. Samuel was claiming that certain future events were now fixed, unavoidable, because of decisions being made in the present. He specifically referenced conflicts in Korea and Vietnam, wars that, at the time, did not align with any official strategic forecasts. Her recommendation was clear: release him, return him to his homeland, allow traditional healing practices to succeed where modern science had failed. The recommendation was initially rejected, but Samuel continued to deteriorate. Finally, the military conceded. Official records state that Samuel Two Rivers was medically discharged and returned to the Yakima Reservation in March 1947. What those records don't mention is this: 3 separate military intelligence units were assigned to monitor him after his return. Their partially declassified surveillance reports paint a disturbing picture. "Subject maintains minimal human contact," reads a June 1947 report. "Neighboring resident reports subject frequently holding conversations with individuals who are not present." Another report notes that Samuel addressed these invisible figures by name, some confirmed deceased, others unknown to any living records. By September, observers reported that Samuel had constructed intricate symbolic arrangements around his property, using stones, wood, and native plants. When asked about them, Samuel explained they were anchors, structures meant to help him stay in this time. Even tribal elders expressed concern. The structures didn't align with known traditional practices. Then, in December 1947, something happened that triggered immediate alarm. Samuel began producing detailed drawings and maps of places he claimed to have visited through his expanded perception. Among them were accurate representations of military installations deep inside the Soviet Union, sites that would not be confirmed by U-2 reconnaissance flights until years later. He also drew weapon systems, computer technologies, and satellite designs that would not exist for decades. At that moment, military intelligence realized something terrifying. Samuel Two Rivers didn't just perceive across space, he was seeing the future. In January 1948, a team was dispatched to bring Samuel Two Rivers back into custody. When they reached his mountain cabin, it was empty. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks in the snow, no indication of where he had gone. The only thing left behind was a hand-drawn map of the United States. Dozens of locations were marked, each paired with dates stretching from 1948 all the way to 2030. Across the bottom, a single sentence was written in careful, steady handwriting. "These cannot be unmade. I will do what I can." For the next 7 years, Samuel Two Rivers vanished completely. Despite one of the most extensive manhunts in intelligence community history, there were no confirmed sightings, no leads, no traces. Then, in April 1955, a forest ranger in Yellowstone National Park encountered a man matching Samuel's description at the site of a small plane crash. According to the ranger's report, the man had arrived before emergency services, despite the crash occurring more than 30 miles from the nearest road. When asked how he knew about the crash, the man looked at him oddly and said, "It's been happening for 3 days now. I couldn't stop it, but I could be here when it did." He helped treat the survivors until evacuation arrived, then he turned and walked into the forest. When the ranger radioed ahead to intercept him on the only trail out of the valley, the responding unit found nothing. There was no other possible route of escape. Throughout the late 1950s and 1960s, similar reports began to accumulate across the American wilderness. A weathered Native American man would appear at the scenes of accidents or natural disasters, sometimes before they occurred. He would warn, assist, guide people to safety, and then vanish. In some cases, his warnings prevented tragedy entirely. One family in Oregon reported being approached while camping by an elderly indigenous man who insisted they move their tent. That night, a massive branch collapsed exactly where they had originally set up camp. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies tracked these incidents closely. They became increasingly convinced that Samuel was deliberately intervening, using his abilities to prevent deaths whenever possible. But there was another pattern that deeply alarmed them. Analysts noticed that Samuel appeared to be systematically visiting the locations marked on the map he had left behind in 1948. Each site corresponded to a nuclear research facility, missile silo, command center, or strategic materials storage location. A classified 1962 assessment concluded, "Subject Two Rivers appears to be conducting reconnaissance on the entirety of the United States nuclear weapons infrastructure." The recommendation was immediate: apprehension and containment. Teams were dispatched to remaining locations in hopes of intercepting him. In September 1963, they succeeded. A 3-man unit encountered Samuel at a remote site in the Nevada desert, not far from a classified facility. According to the heavily redacted report, he offered no resistance. "Subject appeared to have been waiting for us," the team leader wrote. "First words upon approach, 'You're 3 days late. I was beginning to worry.'" Samuel was transported to a specialized facility beneath the newly constructed Mount Rushmore National Memorial. For the next 4 years, he was subjected to relentless debriefings and testing. The full records remain classified, but fragments suggest intelligence officials were focused almost entirely on his knowledge of the Cold War, nuclear strategy, and future conflicts. Samuel produced thousands of pages of information, so sensitive that much of it was never formally recorded. Dr. David Chen, a physicist who later admitted involvement in the program, broke decades of silence in 2011. Samuel's understanding of advanced weapons systems was terrifying. Chen said. He could describe blast radii, radiation dispersion, long-term environmental effects of weapons that were still on drawing boards. But what unsettled them most wasn't the information, it was Samuel's tone. He spoke about nuclear exchanges as if he'd already seen them. 63 million dead in the first hour, he'd say, the way someone might describe yesterday's weather. By 1967, a core group of military and scientific personnel became convinced Samuel's abilities were real. More troublingly, they began to believe his warnings. Operating without official authorization, this group helped orchestrate Samuel's escape in November 1967. The official report simply states, "Subject 2 Rivers escaped custody through unknown means." Unofficial accounts suggest something far more deliberate. Several high-ranking officials allegedly created security vulnerabilities after Samuel shared visions of an imminent nuclear exchange, one that could only be prevented through secret diplomatic channels. For the next 9 years, Samuel vanished again. Rumors placed him deep in the Pacific Northwest wilderness, but organized searches found nothing. During this time, however, unexplained incidents occurred near military installations across the country. Security teams reported unexplained system failures, disrupted communications, and even physical rearrangement of components tied to nuclear launch systems. Then, in 1976, at the height of renewed Cold War tensions, Samuel reappeared somewhere no one expected. He walked into the lobby of the Washington Post and asked to speak with investigative journalist Carl Bernstein. No recording exists. Bernstein has never revealed the details, but co-workers said he emerged visibly shaken. 3 days later, Bernstein arranged a private meeting between Samuel and a senior State Department official. Within weeks, a new back-channel communication line was established between U.S. and Soviet leadership, an effort historians now credit with preventing a catastrophic escalation of nuclear tensions. Immediately after those meetings, Samuel vanished. The final confirmed trace of his existence is a handwritten note delivered to Dr. Whitman, who had retired to a small town in Vermont. The note read, "The futures are branching again. I can see paths now that don't end in fire. Your grandchildren might live full lives in a world where the great weapons remain silent. I've done what I could with this burden. Others will carry it after me. Look to the children who see differently. They are being born more frequently now. They will need guides who understand without fear. Remember, time is not what you think it is. Neither is death." It was signed simply, Samuel, dated October 12, 1976. No verified sighting of Samuel 2 Rivers has ever been reported since. In the decades that followed, the military's interest in psychic phenomena became public through programs like Project Stargate. What remained classified was how deeply those programs were inspired by Samuel's abilities decades earlier. Former intelligence officers have occasionally hinted at a baseline subject whose capabilities far exceeded anything ever replicated. In 1995, a retired Army general testified before a closed Senate committee that the most promising psychic subject in U.S. history had been an indigenous soldier whose abilities emerged during World War II. That testimony remains largely classified. Then, in 2001, following multiple Freedom of Information lawsuits, the government released more than 3,000 pages of documents related to psychological research involving indigenous soldiers. Though heavily redacted, they confirmed one thing unmistakably. Samuel 2 Rivers had been the template. According to Dr. Robert Morning Sky, a Native American scholar who has studied these documents extensively, Samuel's abilities were never as inexplicable as the government believed. Many indigenous cultures have traditions of individuals who perceived beyond ordinary reality, he explained in a 2005 interview. These are not anomalies, they are the result of practices refined over thousands of years. What made Samuel unique wasn't his gift, it was that he was forced to carry it inside a system that had no language, no respect for understanding it. And that, more than anything else, may be the real tragedy of his story. The trauma Samuel endured didn't weaken his abilities. If anything, it seemed to fracture them open, amplifying his perceptions in ways no one could predict or control. Within the Yakama Nation, Samuel Two Rivers remains a complicated figure. There is pride in his service and reverence for his extraordinary gifts, but also deep unease about how those gifts were taken, studied, and used. In 2010, the Yakama Tribal Council formally addressed that unease. They passed a resolution demanding the full declassification of all records related to Samuel Two Rivers, along with other indigenous soldiers who had been drawn into classified military research. The resolution carried a quiet but powerful truth. Their people had always understood that perception extends beyond the physical senses. What happened to Samuel Two Rivers represents both the strength of our traditional knowledge and the danger of removing that knowledge from its cultural roots. His story must be told in full. But the story has never been fully released. Even decades later, the military and intelligence communities continue to resist calls for transparency. As recently as 2023, official statements insisted that key aspects of Samuel's service and his abilities remain too sensitive for public disclosure. What makes that secrecy so unsettling is what has been whispered for generations across indigenous communities throughout North America. Samuel, they say, was not alone. Stories have circulated for decades of others like him, especially children born on reservations near sites of environmental contamination or former military testing grounds. James Clearwater, a Lakota elder who claimed to have met Samuel in the early 1970s, offered one of the most disturbing accounts during a 2015 oral history project. They changed something in him, he said, something that couldn't be undone. Samuel told him it was spreading, that more children would be born able to see across time itself. He believed it wasn't an accident, but a response, an answer from the earth to the wounds humanity had carved into it. Guardians, he called them, children who could sense disasters before they unfolded and quietly work to prevent them. But Samuel also warned him, if those children were ever found by the same people who had used him, they would suffer the same fate. Declassified military documents from the 1980s add weight to those fears. They confirm that intelligence agencies actively ran programs designed to identify children with unusual perceptual abilities, with a particular focus on indigenous communities. Officially, these programs were shut down in 1995. Unofficially, many researchers believe they simply disappeared behind deeper layers of classification. Perhaps the most unsettling part of Samuel Two Rivers' story is how closely it aligns with ancient indigenous prophecies, warnings of a time when the boundaries between past, present, and future would grow thin. Across multiple tribal traditions are references to seers, time walkers, individuals who would emerge during moments of great planetary crisis to glimpse what is coming. In 2017, those prophecies seemed to collide with modern science. An anonymous source claiming to be a former DARPA researcher uploaded hundreds of pages of classified documents to several online platforms. The files vanished almost as quickly as they appeared, but among them was a study drawing a direct connection between global environmental collapse and a rising number of children displaying unexplained perceptual abilities. The report noted something chilling. These abilities closely matched the earliest documented manifestations observed in Samuel Two Rivers more than 70 years earlier. The authenticity of the documents has never been confirmed. Still, they forced an uncomfortable question into the open. Was Samuel truly an anomaly, or was he the first sign of a deeper human adaptation to a planet under extreme stress? The mystery deepened again in 2021. Hikers in Olympic National Park stumbled upon an ancient-looking arrangement of stones and carved wooden markers hidden in a remote valley rarely touched by human presence. At the center lay a weathered metal container. Inside it was a handwritten journal. Carbon dating placed the paper and ink in the late 1970s. The journal, now held by the Smithsonian under restricted access, reportedly describes global events from 1977 to the present day, written as though they had already happened. Even more disturbing are the entries that describe events yet to occur, environmental tipping points, technological breakthroughs, conflicts, and reconciliations still waiting in our future. The final page is said to contain a message addressed to whoever found it. Time is not a river flowing in one direction, it is an ocean, and some of us have learned to swim. What I have written here are not predictions, but observations from different depths of that ocean. Some can be changed. Others are currents too powerful to resist. Learn to recognize the difference. The children who see as I do are among you now. They walk your streets. They sit in your classrooms. Some already know what they are. Others are only beginning to awaken. They are not weapons to be wielded. They are not tools to be used. They were not weapons. They were not tools. They were the Earth's eyes, looking backward and forward at once, searching for a way through the destruction humanity had already set in motion. The journal was signed with a single name, Samuel. Within hours of its discovery, military intelligence officials confiscated it. When questioned, a Department of Defense spokesperson offered only a carefully measured response. The material was potentially relevant to ongoing national security matters and remained under evaluation. And just like that, the truth vanished again. To this day, the full story of Samuel Two Rivers remains buried beneath layers of classification and institutional silence. Yet some believe the strongest evidence that his journey never truly ended comes from the Yakima Reservation itself. Every year, on the winter solstice, traditional offerings appear outside Samuel's long-abandoned cabin. No one has ever been seen leaving them. Elders say the offerings are not just acts of remembrance, but acknowledgments, tributes to a journey that continues beyond the limits of ordinary perception. Some whisper that if you walk far enough into the forests of the Pacific Northwest, beyond roads and trails, you might encounter an indigenous man who seems untouched by time. They say his eyes don't just look at you, they look through you. He won't speak at first. He'll study you, as though reading not only who you are, but every version of yourself that exists across time. And if he decides you're ready, he may offer a warning about a danger ahead, or guidance about a choice that could quietly change the course of your life. Then, just as suddenly, he's gone, melting back into the forest, continuing his silent watch across the landscapes of time. So what is Samuel Two Rivers now? Is he still alive, decades beyond the span of any ordinary human life? Has he truly transcended the boundaries of perception, aging, and time itself? Or has his story evolved into something else entirely, a modern myth shaped by our deepest hopes, fears, and unanswered questions about human potential? What seems certain is this: somewhere within the classified archives of military intelligence agencies lies the truth about the most extraordinary psychic soldier in American history. A man whose abilities may have saved millions of lives, altered the trajectory of the Cold War, and whose genetic or spiritual legacy may still be unfolding in children born today. As humanity faces unprecedented challenges, climate collapse, runaway technology, rising global tensions, it's hard not to wonder whether others like Samuel walk among us. Individuals who see beyond the present moment and work quietly, unseen, to steer us away from our most destructive futures. Perhaps the most important question raised by Samuel Two Rivers' story isn't whether his abilities were real, but what they reveal about our relationship with time itself. If one man could perceive so much, what might be possible for humanity as a whole? Samuel reportedly once said that time is not a cage unless you believe in the bars. The future is not fixed, it breathes. It shifts with every choice we make, and the greatest gift is not seeing what will happen, but helping others realize they still have the power to change it. Whether you believe Samuel's story as literal truth or dismiss it as legend, its message carries weight in uncertain times. The responsibility for shaping the future remains in our hands if we have the wisdom to recognize it. There are forces in this world that science has yet to explain, and in moments of darkness, perhaps we should follow the example of the Yakima elders who still leave offerings at Samuel's cabin, honoring mystery, humility, and wisdom drawn from places we don't fully understand. Because while Samuel Two Rivers used his extraordinary gifts in service to his country, the most profound part of his legacy may be what he ultimately rejected: violence. A man who could sense enemies miles away came to understand that the most dangerous enemies were not soldiers or nations, but greed, fear, separation from nature, and the belief that some lives matter less than others. As we navigate our own uncertain era, maybe the path forward isn't hidden in classified programs or secret research, but in ancient wisdom that reminds us how deeply connected we are to one another and to the world we inhabit. Follow Christ and let His light guide you through these uncertain times. As Samuel reportedly told a young tribal member during one of his last known appearances, "When you stand at the crossroads of time, seeing all paths at once, you learn that only love endures. Everything else, power, weapons, empires, washes away like footprints in sand. Choose compassion, even when it feels weak, because in the longest view of time, it is the only strength that truly lasts." If Samuel Two Rivers' story is true, then it changes something fundamental about how we understand time, choice, and responsibility. It means the future isn't just something that happens to us, it's something we quietly shape, moment by moment, often without realizing it. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of this entire story. Because if one man could see disasters before they happened, if he could intervene, warn others, and alter the course of history, then the real question isn't what Samuel could do. It's what we would do if we were given the same awareness. Would we act, or would we look away? Before you leave, I want you to do something specific. Don't skip this. Go to the comments and answer one question honestly. If Samuel warned you about a tragedy in your future, but saving yourself meant someone else would suffer, what would you choose? Type myself or others. And if you're brave, explain why. There are no right answers here, but how you respond says more about you than you might expect. And one more thing, read the comments after you post yours. You'll realize very quickly that people don't all see the future the same way. If stories like this make you question reality, time, and what it really means to be human, stay here. These aren't just stories, they're reminders. Because if Samuel 2 Rivers was right, then the future is still listening. And so are we.